Iran is facing its worst water crisis in decades.
Iran is facing a crisis so severe that its own president now admits the capital city, Tehran, may no longer be livable. Iran faces an unprecedented drought as water crisis hits Tehran, leaving millions struggling for access to clean water. Reservoirs are running dry, aquifers are collapsing, and daily life is being disrupted across the capital and surrounding regions. Schools, hospitals, and businesses are already feeling the strain, and citizens are forced to ration every drop. This is more than a natural disaster. It's a warning of what happens when climate change, mismanagement, and decades of overuse collide. Today, we are breaking down why Tehran's water crisis is unlike anything the country has seen before, how it's affecting ordinary people, and what it could mean for the future of Iran. Iran is now confronting one of the most severe water crises in its modern history. Across the country, reservoirs are nearly empty, rainfall has dropped to record lows, and millions of citizens are facing an unprecedented shortage of clean water. In Tehran alone, officials are warning that the taps may soon run dry if conditions do not improve. According to the BBC, if rationing doesn't work, we may have to evacuate Tehran, President Masoud Pezeshkian warned, underscoring the seriousness of the situation. Dams like Laishan and Karaj, which supply water to Tehran and neighboring provinces, are holding less than 10% of their capacity, and much of what remains is considered dead water, water that cannot be used because the aquifers have been permanently damaged. This crisis is not limited to Tehran. Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city, is facing an equally dire situation, with its main dams holding less than 3% of their combined capacity. Across provinces such as West Azerbaijan, East Azerbaijan, and Markazi, dams are at single-digit levels, leaving millions without reliable access to water. Over 16 million people are at immediate risk. The problem is not just a natural disaster, it's the result of decades of mismanagement. Experts point to over-extraction of groundwater for agriculture and urban use, poorly maintained water infrastructure, and political negligence. Even when rain does fall, it cannot replenish aquifers that are being permanently crushed by land subsidence, which now exceeds 35 centimeters per year in Iran's central plateau. As geoscientist Dario Solano explained, we saw this coming, emphasizing that the collapse of Iran's water supply is not sudden, it is the predictable result of long-term ecological mismanagement. The scale of the crisis is immense, and the consequences are already affecting daily life. Families are buying water tankers just to flush toilets, and the government has begun penalizing households and businesses that consume excessive water. Iran's water crisis is therefore not only an environmental disaster, but a human disaster, threatening public health, urban stability, and political legitimacy. In a historic and unprecedented decision, Iran announced plans to relocate its capital from Tehran to the southern coast. The reasons are deeply rooted in an ecological catastrophe that has made Tehran increasingly uninhabitable. President Masoud Pezeshkian stated clearly, "We no longer have a choice," signaling that the move is no longer optional, but a necessity. The decision comes after decades of warning signs. Aquifers across the central plateau have been overpumped. The land is sinking at alarming rates, more than 35 centimeters per year, and reservoirs are nearly empty. Scientists estimate that the aquifers lose about 1.7 billion cubic meters of water annually as the ground permanently collapses, leaving no room for underground storage to recover. While climate change has intensified the problem, experts emphasize that this crisis is not solely environmental. Political mismanagement and corruption have played a decisive role. Michael Rubin, a political analyst at the American Enterprise Institute, noted that the situation is the result of a perfect storm of climate change and corruption. Poor urban planning, unchecked groundwater extraction, and decades of political negligence have compounded natural factors to create a city that can no longer sustain its population of over 10 million. The Makran coast, where the government plans to establish the new capital, presents its own challenges. The region is remote, has a harsh climate, and would require more than $100 billion to develop into a functional administrative center. Experts, including urban planner Linda Shai from Cornell University, caution that moving the capital will not solve the immediate hardships faced by Tehran's residents. She said, "Climate change is not the thing that is causing it, but it is a convenient factor to blame in order to avoid taking responsibility for decades of mismanagement." Historically, Iran has relocated its capital multiple times, from Tabriz to Isfahan to Shiraz, but never due to an ecological disaster. This move is therefore unprecedented in modern history, highlighting the severity of the crisis. Beyond environmental necessity, the relocation also carries political and strategic considerations, allowing the government to centralize power in a new, modernized city while attempting to mitigate public unrest. In short, Tehran is no longer viable as the political, economic, and administrative heart of Iran. The capital relocation is both a response to an environmental emergency and an attempt by the regime to navigate a crisis it helped create. Iran's water crisis is closely linked to climate change, which has intensified droughts, heat waves, and erratic rainfall. Autumn 2025 brought record low precipitation, and forecasts predict almost no rain for the next 10 days in Tehran, leaving reservoirs and dams at critically low levels. The combination of climate stress and overpumping of groundwater has created a perfect storm. Even when it rains, aquifers cannot recover, and critical dams near emptying, leaving cities like Tehran and Mashhad vulnerable. Aging pipelines, leaks, and poorly managed dams worsen the impact, disrupting daily life and forcing millions to compete for scarce water. Iran's climate reality is a stark warning. Without urgent action, the country faces repeated, escalating water emergencies that threaten public health, urban life, and national stability. While climate change has intensified Iran's water crisis, the root causes lie in systemic mismanagement and corruption. For decades, Iran's water, land, and wastewater systems have suffered from poor planning, inadequate maintenance, and political neglect. Over-extraction of groundwater for agriculture and urban expansion has irreversibly damaged aquifers. Pipelines and dams, many of which are decades old, leak massive amounts of water daily, reducing what little supply remains. By ignoring repeated warnings from scientists, political leaders allowed water shortages to grow into a full-scale ecological and social emergency. Even the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has repeatedly acknowledged the looming threat in public addresses, but effective action was minimal. Compounding these structural problems, regional conflict has further destabilized infrastructure. During the 12-day war with Israel earlier this year, Iranian authorities reported that northern Tehran neighborhoods, including Tadrish, suffered damage to water systems. Pipes were ruptured and localized flooding occurred, directly impacting the city's already fragile supply. While the Israeli military said it had targeted Iranian military command centers, the collateral effect on civilian infrastructure worsened the crisis. Corruption also manifests in how resources are allocated. Critics argue that the regime has prioritized foreign engagements, supporting proxies in Gaza and Lebanon, over addressing urgent domestic crises. Iran's water emergency is therefore not a purely natural disaster. Climate change amplified the problem, but decades of corruption, mismanagement, and the consequences of regional conflict have created a situation where even emergency interventions struggle to meet the needs of the population. The human cost of Iran's water crisis is already staggering. Millions of citizens are experiencing the daily realities of a system in collapse. In Tehran, residents report long periods without running water. One local described the situation to BBC Persian. It's been 4 or 5 hours without water. I've bought bottled water just to be able to go to the toilet. Families are forced to purchase water tankers to meet even the most basic household needs. Beyond daily inconveniences, shortages threaten public health, sanitation, and economic activity. Hospitals, schools, and businesses struggle to operate under conditions where clean water is scarce. Power cuts, often lasting 8 to 10 hours a day in some cities, compound the difficulties. Merchants report severe stagnation, and citizens face increased costs for essentials, pushing many families to the brink of survival. Iran's water crisis is therefore not only an environmental disaster, but a human disaster, affecting millions of lives, undermining basic needs, and increasing social tensions across the country. As the water and electricity crisis worsens, ordinary Iranians have taken to the streets to demand their basic rights, and in doing so, are openly challenging the regime itself. On August 22, 2025, thousands of citizens protested in cities including Shiraz, Kazan, and Tehran, initially voicing frustration over power and water outages. What began as a demand for essential utilities quickly evolved into a direct political challenge. In Shiraz, crowds chanted, "Water and electricity are our undeniable right," quickly escalating to anti-regime slogans like "Death to the dictator" and "Iran is not your inheritance." Citizens also protested government spending abroad, shouting "No Gaza, no Lebanon, only the people of Iran," and sang the patriotic anthem, "A Iran," in a show of national pride. The unrest spread to multiple sectors. Merchants in Tehran protested market stagnation and taxes, while workers at the Karun 4 dam and oil platforms demanded better conditions. Even employees in critical industries are now questioning the regime's competence. Authorities responded with repression, using tear gas, mass arrests, and confiscating phones. Families seeking news of detainees faced hostility and misinformation. Despite this, protests continue, uniting different segments of society. These demonstrations show a population losing faith in the government. Water shortages, power outages, and decades of mismanagement have fueled widespread anger, turning environmental and infrastructure crises into a national movement demanding accountability. The Iranian government faces a major challenge, tackling a crisis that is environmental, infrastructural, and political. Short-term measures like strict water rationing, penalties for overuse, repairing old pipelines, and importing water may offer temporary relief. But experts warn that lasting solutions require addressing decades of mismanagement and corruption. Long-term strategies include rebuilding aquifers and stopping over-extraction, shifting agriculture to less water-intensive crops, modernizing dams, pipelines, and sewage systems, ensuring transparent governance and fair water distribution. Even with these measures, moving the capital to the Makran coast, a project estimated to cost over $100 billion, may be necessary, but it will not immediately relieve suffering in Tehran. Ultimately, Iran must choose between radical reforms to secure its water future or risk worsening environmental collapse, social unrest, and political instability. The clock is ticking. Iran's water crisis is no longer just an environmental issue. It has become a national emergency affecting millions, shaking the foundations of society and challenging the legitimacy of the regime. As dams run dry, aquifers collapse, and citizens protest for their basic rights, the clock is running out for Tehran and the nation at large. The question now is whether Iran can confront decades of mismanagement, corruption, and climate pressures before the crisis spirals further. One thing is clear: a nation cannot survive without water, and for Iran, the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. If you want more in-depth geopolitical analyses and updates on global crises, make sure to subscribe and stay informed.